She spent the winter shivering in an old Honda, unseen, unwanted, even by her own daughter. But one unexpected email led her to a sunlit doorstep in California, and a life no one could take from her again. The cardboard underneath Maggie Walker's back had thinned over time, softened by 3 months of her weight and the occasional drip from the Honda Civic's cracked sunroof. At 62, Maggie never imagined her retirement years would be defined by the rhythm of passing headlights and the hum of a grocery store's dead parking lot. Every morning, she'd wake before dawn, slipping out from beneath her winter coat, the only blanket she had left, and wiping fog from the windows with the sleeve of a sweatshirt she'd owned for decades. The Kroger supermarket behind her had closed 2 years ago, but its faded sign and empty lot had become a kind of sanctuary, invisible to most, especially her daughter. Lauren's voice still echoed from their last phone call. "Just sleep in your car a little longer, Mom. I'm really swamped with the pregnancy and Emma's daycare pickup schedule. You understand, right?" Maggie did understand. Too well. The flood had taken everything from her. Her 2-bedroom brick bungalow on Elwood Street, her mother's wedding china, photo albums, journals, the quilt stitched by her grandmother. Her insurance company had issued checks for structural damage, but what of the life she'd built inside it? That no policy could replace. She had come to Lauren's house with nothing but 2 garbage bags of belongings and a heart full of hope that family meant something. At first, Lauren was sweet. Greg, her husband, was polite. They gave Maggie the guest room. But then came the sticky notes, little reminders Greg left on the fridge about contributing to groceries and electricity usage. Maggie learned to read their silence over dinner, their sideways glances when she lingered in the kitchen too long. She made herself smaller, quieter. The morning she packed up her bags and slid behind the wheel of her Honda, Lauren barely looked up from spooning oatmeal into baby Emma's mouth. "That's probably for the best," she said, brushing mashed banana from the toddler's chin. "Greg's been stressed about work. You know how he gets when he's stressed." Yes. Maggie knew. Now, as snow dusted the edges of the parking lot and the wind crept in through the window seals, Maggie stared at her phone. Another message from Lauren buzzed on the cracked screen. "Hope you're okay. Greg got the promotion. We're house hunting now. Baby number 2 due in April." There were 3 exclamation points in that last line. Maggie stared until the screen dimmed. She didn't reply. Instead, she made her way to the Columbus Metropolitan Library, the only warm place that didn't ask questions. Rosa, the librarian, had stopped probing weeks ago. Maggie came in, nodded, and spent hours at the public computer, applying for receptionist jobs, researching senior housing, or simply existing in a room where no one told her she was in the way. On this particular Tuesday, she was about to log off when she saw the subject line, Estate of Eleanor Hartman. Her hands froze on the mouse. It couldn't be. She clicked. "Dear Ms. Margaret Walker, we represent the estate of Eleanor Hartman. We have been attempting to reach you regarding a bequest left to you in her final will. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience." Her chest tightened. Aunt Ellie? Her mother's older sister? The one who had moved to California in the 80s and sent birthday cards well into the early 2000s? Maggie hadn't heard from her in over a decade and assumed she had long passed. A trembling hand reached for her prepaid phone. Her fingers dialed the number listed in the email. "Good morning, Harrison Blackwell and Associates," a calm voice answered. "This is Margaret Walker. I got an email about a will?" "Ah, yes. Ms. Walker, we've been looking for you. I'm Robert Rice, handling Ms. Hartman's estate. Are you able to speak freely?" Maggie glanced around the computer lab. "Yes." Well then, Rice continued, your aunt left you her home in Pasadena, California, along with associated assets. After taxes and final debts, the estate is valued at approximately $1.5 million. The words didn't compute. Maggie blinked. Excuse me? $1.5 million, he repeated. That includes the house, investment accounts, and a small life insurance policy. It's all detailed in the documents I'll email you now. I was living in my car this morning, Maggie whispered. There was a pause. Then gently, I think it's time you didn't anymore, Ms. Walker. Maggie closed her eyes. In the hum of the library around her, she suddenly felt like she'd stepped into someone else's life. The kids giggling in the children's corner, the soft thud of books being checked in, the quiet click of Rosa's cartwheels. All of it suddenly seemed far away. She left the library and sat in her Honda, clutching the edge of the steering wheel, willing herself to believe it wasn't just another cruel dream. That night, she didn't sleep in the car. She booked a cheap motel room with the last of the money she'd squirreled away in an envelope under the driver's seat. She stood under the hot shower for 40 minutes, letting months of cold, shame, and silence run down the drain. When she looked in the mirror, a woman stared back, older, thinner, tired, but with something new in her eyes. Fire. That night, she sat on the edge of the motel bed and stared at photos of a small craftsman home in Pasadena. Stucco walls, orange trees in the backyard, original hardwood floors. It wasn't just a house. It was dignity. The next morning, the fluorescent lights of the Columbus Metropolitan Library flickered to life as Maggie stepped through the automatic doors. The warm whoosh of indoor air met her face, cutting through the chill that had settled in her bones overnight. Though she'd slept in a motel bed for the first time in months, her body was still wired to wake at 5:30, as if the rhythm of survival couldn't be turned off with a soft mattress. Rosa Pratt, the librarian with silver curls and an expression that always seemed 2 breaths away from kindness, greeted her with a small nod. "Morning, Ms. Walker." Maggie paused. It was the first time Rosa had used her name. "Morning," she replied, her voice steadier than it had been in days. She made her way to her usual computer terminal in the back corner, where no one asked questions and the humming of machines offered a gentle privacy. She logged in with shaking fingers, opened her email, and reread the message from Robert Rice 3 more times. The digits still made no sense. $1.5 million. She clicked the attachment. A PDF summary of the estate. The Pasadena house, several modest investment accounts, a retirement annuity, and a $100,000 life insurance policy. A lifetime of careful saving, quietly stewarded by a woman who had faded from Maggie's life before she ever truly knew her. A second email had arrived overnight from Rice. Flight arrangements can be made at your convenience. We'll meet you at the Pasadena property upon arrival. Please let us know how we can assist. Maggie leaned back in the stiff plastic chair, eyes drifting to the high windows of the library. Outside, the morning snow was beginning to fall again. Soft, powdery flakes that blanketed the abandoned strip mall next door like powdered sugar on a forgotten cake. She could leave this town today. She could be on a plane to California before sundown. And yet, her fingers hovered over her phone. The temptation to call Lauren was sharp, like the old reflex of reaching for a hot kettle, even after you've been burned. Would Lauren be happy, proud, angry? Did Maggie owe her the truth or just silence? Instead of calling, she did something quieter. She opened a new browser tab and searched Pasadena, California, Craftsman Homes. The screen filled with photos of wide porches, fruit trees, windows that caught golden sun rather than Ohio's gloom. Her breath caught, when she saw the exact house. 1045 Craftsman Avenue. 2 bedrooms, a front porch that wrapped around the side, white trim and pale yellow siding. There were wind chimes hanging from the eaves in the photo. She remembered wind chimes. In her old life, she'd had a set hanging outside the kitchen window that had belonged to her mother. Something inside her chest cracked open. She stood abruptly, shutting down the computer. "Thanks, Rosa," she mumbled on her way out. "Take care today, Ms. Walker," Rosa called after her, with something more than politeness in her tone. Outside, the snow had turned to slush. Maggie climbed into the Honda and drove to the only place she knew where her thoughts could stretch out, the riverside park along the Scioto River. The city skyline stood gray and impassive in the distance, and geese trudged along the icy bank like stubborn old men. She parked and pulled out her phone. After 3 deep breaths, she called the law office. "This is Robert Rice," came the clipped professional voice. "Mr. Rice, it's Maggie. Margaret Walker. I'm ready." There was a pause. "Wonderful. Shall I arrange the flight?" "I'll pay for it myself," she said. "I'd like to arrive quietly, no fuss." "Of course," he replied with a slight note of respect. "The property will be ready. There's a neighbor, Mrs. Clayton, who's been looking after the house. She'll be notified." "Thank you." After hanging up, Maggie drove straight to a department store and bought a new blouse, a second-hand rolling suitcase, and a bottle of lavender shampoo. She paid in cash. She checked into the same motel that night with a slightly straighter spine and a plan written on the inside of her heart. Pasadena, by Friday. Later that evening, wrapped in a scratchy motel comforter, she dialed Lauren's number. It rang 4 times before her daughter answered. "Mom? Is everything okay? We haven't heard from you in a few days. Emma's asking about you." "I'm all right," Maggie said. "Just figuring some things out." There was a pause. "Okay. Well, Greg got the promotion. We've been touring houses. There's one we love, but it's a little out of reach. We might need to ask for some help depending on how things go." Maggie's mouth felt dry. She hadn't said a word about the inheritance. "Sounds like a big step," she replied. "It is. This baby's going to need a nursery, and Emma wants bunk beds. You know, everything's moving fast." Lauren's voice bubbled with excitement, the kind Maggie remembered from her daughter's teenage years, when new shoes or a date to the dance felt like miracles. "Let me know how it goes," Maggie said gently. "I'll be traveling this week. I'll check in when I get there." "There?" But Maggie didn't elaborate. The next day at 6:30 a.m., she boarded a one-way flight from Columbus to LAX. The plane lifted into the cloudy sky, leaving behind the empty parking lot, the silent notes on Lauren's fridge, and 3 months of cold apologies. As the plane banked west, Maggie watched Ohio fall away beneath her, and with it, the woman she had been. She wasn't running. She was reclaiming. The plane touched down in Los Angeles just after noon. The heat hit Maggie like a second sun, spilling into the open-air terminal with a casual warmth that made her doubt her memory of winter. She hadn't set foot in California in over 40 years, and the scent in the air, citrus, eucalyptus, and distant ocean, was like opening a forgotten book and being startled by the familiar ink. Her rental car was a pale blue sedan that smelled like vinyl and possibility. She adjusted the mirrors, started the engine, and merged onto the 110 freeway with the cautious grace of someone who had survived hard things. Every palm tree lining the exit ramps reminded her that she wasn't in Ohio anymore. By the time she reached Pasadena, the sun had dropped just enough to cast golden light across the rooftops. GPS guided her through narrow residential streets where craftsman homes wore coats of ivy and front yards boasted orange trees heavy with fruit. She turned onto Craftsman Avenue and slowed as she approached 1045. It was there. just as it had looked in the photo. Pale yellow siding, white trim, a deep porch wrapped around one side like an arm mid-embrace. Wind chimes, old and dust-covered, still swung slightly in the afternoon breeze. The house wasn't large, but it was proud. A woman in her 60s stood on the front steps with a watering can and a dog the size of a loaf of bread. "You must be Maggie," she said, setting the can down. Maggie stepped out, cautious. "Yes. Are you Mrs. Clayton?" "Dottie. Welcome home, sweetheart." The words stopped Maggie cold. Dottie stepped forward and pulled her into a brief hug, quick, not overbearing, but warm. "Eleanor spoke of you often, you know," she added, pulling back. "Right before she passed, she told me to make sure the lights stayed on until you found your way back." Maggie swallowed. I hadn't spoken to her in decades. Didn't matter. Not to her. Dottie showed her inside. The house was spotless, clearly loved even in its vacancy. Hardwood floors shone beneath sunlight streaming through thick lace curtains. A quilt lay neatly folded at the foot of a twin bed in the guest room, and Eleanor's framed photographs lined the hallway. A mixture of black and white snapshots, vintage Pasadena landscapes, and one faded photo of Maggie as a child holding a gingerbread cookie. "She never stopped wondering if you'd come back," Dottie said softly, catching her gaze. Maggie blinked hard. "I thought she was angry with me." "Maybe. But love's louder than anger, especially as you get older." They stood in the kitchen, where the smell of lemon oil lingered in the wood cabinets. "She had the place retrofitted about 6 years ago," Dottie said. "New wiring, some plumbing. It's not fancy, but it'll hold you. And the porch swing still works." Maggie nodded, overwhelmed. Her hand touched the countertop like it was a sacred object. "Thank you for keeping it. All of it." "I didn't do it for you," Dottie said with a wink. "I did it for Eleanor. But now that you're here, I'm glad I did." They shared a cup of coffee on the porch while the sun dipped below the jacaranda trees lining the street. Dottie talked about the neighborhood, Mr. Berman's roses, the Saturday farmer's market, the school 2 blocks down. And slowly, Maggie felt the tight threads in her chest begin to loosen. That night, after Dottie left, Maggie wandered the house alone. In the closet of what had once been Eleanor's bedroom, she found a box labeled Maggie. Inside were old drawings, her high school graduation program, and letters she had mailed back from college. Never opened. Her hands trembled as she pulled out a tiny pair of baby booties, hand-crocheted, wrapped in tissue. She sat on the floor and wept. Not just for Eleanor. Not just for the years gone. But for all the words they had never said, and all the forgiveness they had quietly offered across the distance of time. Later, she opened the window. The Pasadena night was velvet and still, and somewhere a wind chime sang a single note. It sounded like home. She slept in Eleanor's bed, beneath a hand-stitched quilt, and dreamed of lemon trees and sunlight and the smell of baking bread. For the first time in years, she didn't wake with dread. She woke with direction. The next morning, Maggie walked to the corner cafe for coffee. As she waited in line, her phone buzzed. It was Lauren. "Hey, Mom, any chance you'd be up for a chat soon? I've been thinking about what you said." Maggie stared at the message. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she ordered a small black coffee and sat outside beneath a flowering jacaranda, letting the sun warm her face. A young couple walked by with a toddler between them. A college student with a cello case leaned against the bus stop. There was life here. She pulled out the letter from Robert Rice again. At the bottom of the estate summary, written in Eleanor's hand, was a note. For the years I can't return, I hope this house helps you begin again. You were always worth it. Love, Eleanor. Maggie folded the paper gently. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew this much. She would not sell the house. She would live in it. She would honor it. And somehow, she would build something back. The Pasadena sun was still soft in the sky when Maggie stood barefoot on the front porch, coffee in hand, watching a hummingbird dip through the jacaranda blossoms. The air smelled of citrus and possibility. For the first time in months, her chest didn't feel heavy when she breathed. But her peace lasted exactly 9 minutes. The screen door creaked open behind her. A single chime sounded from her phone. One new message. Lauren. She stared at the name for a long moment before opening it. I'm glad you're safe. Jane told me you inherited a house. Maggie didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out at the quiet street. The words seemed harmless, maybe even curious, but under them she felt a tug, not of love, but calculation. Lauren hadn't asked how she was sleeping, if her back still ached from the car, if she'd eaten anything other than gas station peanuts and motel toast for 3 weeks straight. She only wanted to know about the house. Still, Maggie typed, "Yes, from Aunt Eleanor, in Pasadena." The reply came almost instantly. Pasadena? California? That's surprising. Is it valuable? Maggie didn't answer. Instead, she walked barefoot across the wooden floor of the living room, opened Eleanor's ledger again, and stared at the final page. 1.5 million. That's what the house and trust were worth, according to the executor. Maggie had never held more than $800 in her checking account at once, and her daughter, who had insisted for years that Maggie was financially irresponsible, now suddenly remembered how to send full sentences. By noon, Maggie had 3 more texts. Jane says you're in the Craftsman district. That's historic. Have you thought about selling it? You could move closer to us. I bet that house would go quick. Maggie stared at the last message. Sell it? After one night in that house, sleeping beneath Eleanor's old quilt, hearing the creak of her footsteps in the floorboards, the smell of lemon oil in every cabinet, it felt less like a house and more like a body that had kept its soul tucked in the rafters. She turned her phone off. That evening, Maggie walked to the neighborhood bakery and bought 2 almond croissants. One for now, one for tomorrow. She sat outside on a wooden bench and listened to the gentle murmur of a city that didn't expect anything from her. She liked it that way. But Lauren didn't give up. The next day, a voicemail came. Maggie let it play on speaker as she folded laundry in the kitchen. Mom, I just want to talk. You know I care about you. I do. I'm sorry if I sounded off. It's just $1.5 million is a lot. That's a huge opportunity for you, for us. You could finally have a comfortable life, near us, near your granddaughter. Maggie paused. She hadn't seen her granddaughter Sophie in over 2 years. Not since Christmas, and only for 3 hours, supervised, while Lauren made excuses about ballet recitals and dinner plans. She could still remember Sophie clutching her hand as she left. Grandma, next time can you stay longer? But the next time had never come. Later that afternoon, Dottie knocked on the screen door, holding a small jar of orange marmalade. I make it with blood oranges, she said, setting it on the counter. For emotional emergencies and rude family. Maggie laughed. It was dry, but real. You psychic, Dottie? No, just observant. You've had that trying not to cry face all day. Maggie told her about the texts, the voicemail, the sudden interest in the house. Dottie listened without judgment. When Maggie finished, she asked, "Do you think I'm being petty?" "Petty?" Dottie blinked. "No, sweetheart. Petty is selling the house and mailing your daughter a fruit basket from the Bahamas. You're just tired of being used." Maggie smiled. "That's it, isn't it?" "That's always it. You give and give and give, and when you finally get something back, people act like it's theirs to divide." They sat together on the porch, sharing toast slathered with the marmalade. The light turned golden. The breeze smelled of rosemary and dusk. That night, Maggie wrote a letter, the kind with a pen and a stamp, addressed to Sophie. "My darling girl, I miss you every single day. I hope you're dancing and smiling and being as brave as ever. I'm living in a yellow house now, one with a porch swing and lemon trees. I think you'd love it. There's a room here that I'm fixing up, and I think of you whenever I look at it. I hope one day you'll visit. I'll save a croissant for you." She signed it with a hand that trembled slightly, then sealed the envelope with a kiss. She didn't text Lauren back. She sent the letter to Sophie instead. 2 days passed without contact. Then a knock at the door. It wasn't Lauren. It was Frank. He looked sheepish in his black slacks and tucked-in polo, holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers that had seen better days. "Hi," he said. Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Frank, I wasn't expecting you." "Jane sent me." Of course she did. "She heard about the inheritance," he added, not making eye contact. "And she said maybe I could come see if you needed help fixing up the place. I know how to handle pipes, gutters, that kind of thing." Maggie stared at him for a moment. Frank, the man who once said her car smelled like old regret, and that he didn't marry no charity case. She didn't speak. He fumbled. "We could forget the past, huh?" Maggie stepped forward. She took the flowers gently, placed them in his hands, and said softly but without tremor, "You should give those to the next woman who doesn't believe she deserves better." Then she closed the door. That night, the moon hung low over Pasadena. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea and flipping through Eleanor's old journals. There were entries about gardening, poetry, even her favorite bread recipe. But in one tucked-away page, scrawled in shaky pen, were 4 simple lines. "To the girl I raised and lost, I leave not just walls or wood. I leave the quiet that heals, and the right to never explain." Maggie closed the book and placed her hand on its worn cover. She didn't need to defend herself anymore. She had nothing to prove, not to Lauren, not to Frank, not even to the version of herself who once believed she had to earn every scrap of dignity. She was home now, and she would no longer apologize for surviving. The first time Maggie cooked in the yellow house, she forgot the salt. She stood over the stove in the soft light of late afternoon, apron tied loosely at her back, stirring lentils in Eleanor's old Dutch oven. The kitchen smelled of garlic and thyme, and the window was open to the breeze that carried birdsong and jacaranda petals. It felt like something sacred, not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. She was halfway through slicing tomatoes when she heard it. Laughter. Children's laughter, high and unfiltered. Then a voice. "Mom! She has a swing!" Maggie froze. There, at the edge of the lawn, standing behind the iron gate, was Sophie. 8 years old now, her hair longer, her face older, but unmistakably Sophie. And behind her stood Lauren. She held a bottle of wine and a Tupperware of salad like an offering. Her smile was tight, hopeful. "You didn't answer my texts, so we just came." Maggie walked to the porch slowly, the knife still in her hand. She didn't speak. Sophie broke the silence first. "Grandma, are you mad?" Maggie's heart softened. She knelt and opened the gate, and Sophie ran into her arms with the kind of force that made Maggie's knees wobble. "No, sweet girl," Maggie whispered into her hair. "I'm just surprised, that's all." Lauren stood awkwardly on the sidewalk. "I thought maybe we could have dinner, like old times." Maggie looked at the wine, then at Lauren's eyes, then at Sophie, who was now running to the porch swing, squealing with delight. "Dinner's almost ready," Maggie said quietly, "if you're willing to eat lentils without salt." Inside, the house felt smaller than Maggie remembered. Or maybe it was just filled with ghosts, some kind, some stubborn. Lauren wandered through the hallway, running her fingers along the baseboards like she was appraising the wood. "Mom, this place is nicer than I imagined." Maggie ladled soup into ceramic bowls. "Eleanor kept it with care. She never threw things away just because they were old." Lauren blinked. "Is that a dig at me?" Maggie didn't answer. They sat at the dining table, the one with uneven legs and a long scratch down the middle, where Eleanor once dragged a flower vase too hard. Sophie swung her legs under the table. "Grandma, do you live here alone?" "I do, but it doesn't feel lonely." "That's weird," Sophie said, slurping her spoon. "My mom says being alone is sad." Maggie met Lauren's eyes across the table. "Your mom and I see a lot of things differently." Lauren flushed. "I didn't come to fight. I didn't invite you to." There was a silence, the kind that only stretches between mother and daughter, full of things said years ago that never quite healed. Sophie looked between them. "Can I have more bread?" "Of course," Maggie smiled, grateful for the interruption. As she rose, Lauren said, "I was scared, you know, when you disappeared." Maggie paused. "I didn't disappear. I just stopped asking for scraps." After dinner, they moved to the porch. Sophie ran in circles, chasing fireflies, her laughter echoing into the dusky Pasadena sky. Maggie poured 2 cups of tea, chamomile for her, green for Lauren. For a moment it was quiet. Then Lauren exhaled. "I messed up," Maggie sipped. "Yes. I didn't know how to love you without feeling embarrassed. You made choices I didn't understand. You didn't ask for help when you needed it. You stayed in that marriage too long. You stayed in that car too long." Maggie looked out at the roses she had planted 2 weeks ago. "You know what the hardest part was?" Lauren continued. "Jane said you were probably dead, and I was relieved, because it meant I didn't have to explain you anymore." Maggie said nothing. Lauren's voice cracked. "I'm sorry." The apology sat between them like a foreign language. Then Maggie whispered, "You wanted me to be someone else." "I know. But I was surviving. I made mistakes, yes, but I never stopped loving you." Lauren blinked fast. Maggie reached for her hand. "Love that demands perfection isn't love, it's a transaction. And I'm done trading." Lauren nodded slowly. "Can we start over?" "Only if you're ready to meet me where I am, not where you wish I'd been." That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up like a kitten, cheeks sticky with peach juice. Maggie tucked a quilt around her and kissed her forehead. Lauren stood nearby, clutching her car keys. "She really loves you." "I love her too." She asked if she could stay for the weekend. Maggie smiled. "She can stay for as long as she likes." Lauren hesitated. "And me?" Maggie paused. "You can visit," she said gently. "But this time, we'll have boundaries. This house is mine. This peace is mine. I didn't claw my way through heartbreak just to hand it away." Lauren looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she nodded. "I'll see you Sunday." When the door closed and silence returned, Maggie stood in the living room and exhaled for what felt like the first time all evening. She turned off the lights. The house glowed with the soft quiet of forgiveness, not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that chooses to walk forward anyway. Outside, the jacarandas whispered in the night breeze. Inside, Sophie dreamed. And Maggie, heart fuller, spine straighter, stood barefoot in her kitchen, smiling at the way the walls no longer echoed loneliness, but laughter. They had come for dinner, and she had served more than food. She had served truth, and somehow it was enough. The sun that filtered through the stained glass window of the Pasadena cottage cast gentle colors on the old oak floors. Maggie stood by the front door, a brass key in her hand, fingers trembling slightly. Clara Monroe had left early for her shift at the clinic, and Ellie Hartman's absence echoed through the house like a memory not yet ready to fade. This morning, Maggie would open the garden gate. It had been locked since the funeral. Clara said she couldn't bring herself to touch it. Ellie had tended the garden every Sunday afternoon for 20 years, roses, lavender, lemon balm, and a creeping vine that wrapped itself around the trellis like it was holding the house in a soft embrace. The gate's rusted latch had been painted teal, a color Ellie said reminded her of the ocean off Big Sur. Maggie pressed the key into the lock. It stuck. She jiggled it. Her breath caught. Then, a click. The gate creaked open. What lay beyond wasn't pristine. It was wild. Lavender bushes had swallowed the path, and the roses had turned thready and disobedient. But it was beautiful, alive. Like Ellie had whispered to the soil long after everyone else had stopped listening. She stepped in. The smell, earthy, warm, and familiar, rushed her with a wave of comfort she hadn't expected. Maggie dropped to her knees and ran her fingers through the dirt. She hadn't touched soil like this since she was a girl back in Ohio, helping her own mother plant tomatoes behind their rented duplex in Franklin Park. She sat there for over an hour, pruning dead branches, brushing away brown petals, watering what she could find that still breathed. And then she found it. A rusted tin box buried behind the base of the lemon tree, wrapped in a child's faded bandana, tied with twine. She brushed away the dirt and untied the knot. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed in the same handwriting. To Margaret, should she ever find this. Maggie gasped. Her hands shook. She pressed the first envelope to her chest before tearing it open. Dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then I am already in the wind, hopefully scattered under this tree, or at the very least in the laughter of someone you've made coffee for. I never told you how much I admired your quietness, your strength, how you always loved even when the world didn't give you a place to do it safely. I watched what Jane did, how she chipped away at your hope year after year. I didn't know how to stop it. But I could leave you something. Not just the house or the money. I wanted to leave you this garden, this soil, this mess. because I believe in your ability to grow things. People, too. Tell Clara I love her. Tell her I know she was always the brave one, even if I did all the talking. And Margaret, live. Really live. Yours, always, Ellie. The letter dropped from Maggie's hands into her lap. She wept into her palms, not like she had in her car that night in the Kroger parking lot in Columbus. Not from loss. This time, from love. And from the clear, overwhelming realization that someone had seen her all along. When she returned to the house, there was a message from Lauren. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Greg and I were talking. Can we come by this weekend for dinner? Maybe bring the kids? Let me know. Love you." Maggie stared at the phone. Her daughter's words didn't sting this time. They rolled off her like rain on old stone. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the garden. She texted back, "Dinner's fine. Bring wine. I'll cook." That weekend, Lauren and Greg arrived with 2 sleepy kids and a bottle of Cabernet. Clara had set the table early and lit candles, despite Maggie's protests that were not royalty. The kids ran around the hallways while Clara plated roasted chicken and fresh bread. Greg complimented the house with a strange look in his eyes, half admiration, half calculation. Dinner began warmly. Maggie laughed at stories about Ohio, about Greg trying to change a tire and locking himself in the garage. Clara held back smiles but kept watchful eyes on Maggie. Lauren was more quiet than usual, carefully observing her mother's ease in this new life. Halfway through the meal, Lauren put her fork down. "Mom, I know we weren't there for you the way we should have been, but I'm glad you're here. This place suits you." Greg shifted in his chair but said nothing. Maggie smiled, genuinely. "Thank you, Lauren. That means more than you know." It could have ended there, but Greg cleared his throat. "Mags, can I ask something?" Clara's shoulders stiffened. Maggie nodded slowly. "I've been looking into some real estate opportunities," Greg began. "This neighborhood's market is about to explode. If we had a little extra capital, say 70 grand, we could flip 2 places in Glendale and double it." "Greg," Lauren whispered, warning. But Greg continued. "We'd pay you back, of course. With interest. Family helping family." Silence hung like fog. Maggie's fork hovered over her plate. She set it down. Clara reached for her hand under the table, a subtle gesture that gave her spine. "No, Greg. I won't be loaning you money. Not today. Not again." Greg's mouth opened, but Maggie continued. "But I'm happy to give you seconds on the chicken. You'll need your strength for the next deal." The room went still, and then Clara laughed. Maggie laughed. Even Lauren, stunned, let out a nervous chuckle. Greg looked like he'd swallowed a lemon, but he didn't speak again. Later that night, as the children slept on the couch, Lauren came to find Maggie in the garden. "You've changed," Lauren said. Maggie smiled. "No, honey, I just remembered who I was." The evening after this family dinner, the air hung heavy in the garden. Warm with a hint of orange blossom, cool enough to whisper that autumn wasn't far. Maggie sat on the wide wooden porch, a mug of chamomile tea in her hands, wrapped in an old quilt Clara had brought from her mother's house in San Diego. She had thought the confrontation with Greg would leave a residue of guilt or regret. But it hadn't. Instead, Maggie felt oddly light, like some invisible burden had slipped from her shoulders and scattered into the lavender. The door creaked. Clara stepped out barefoot, holding a second cup of tea, and sank into the rocking chair beside her. "You handled that beautifully," Clara said. Maggie shrugged, letting her eyes follow the wind chime as it danced lazily above them. "Took me 62 years to say no without apologizing." "It was worth the wait," Clara replied, her voice low and warm.
I don't think Lauren expected it.
Maggie smiled faintly, then turned to her.
Clara, why did Ellie leave this all to me?
Clara hesitated. Her hand gripped the mug a little tighter.
Because you needed a beginning, she said softly, and because she trusted you'd know what to do with it.
Maggie leaned back in the chair, letting the words settle. But just as the comfort began to stretch into silence, the sound of tires crunching gravel snapped them both alert. Headlights cut across the yard. Lauren's silver SUV. Clara rose. "You want me to go inside?" Maggie shook her head. "No, stay." Lauren stepped out of the car alone, clutching her purse like it was a shield. She climbed the porch steps, her heels clicking softly against the wood, and stopped a few feet away from them.
"Hi,"
she said, voice uncertain.
"Hi,"
Maggie replied, not moving from her seat.
"I wasn't expecting you again so soon."
"I know, but I wanted to talk." Clara nodded and stood.
"I'll give you two a moment,"
she said gently, and disappeared through the screen door. Lauren remained standing until Maggie motioned to the chair beside her.
"Sit."
Lauren obeyed, the wood creaking beneath her like it, too, was wary. The air between them was thick with years of things unsaid. Finally, Lauren spoke.
"I didn't know Greg would ask for money last night. That wasn't why we came."
Maggie nodded but didn't reply.
"I was embarrassed," Lauren added. "I still am."
Maggie took a sip of her tea.
"Embarrassment isn't the worst thing to feel. It usually comes right before growth."
Lauren gave a strained laugh. "That sounds like something Ellie would have said."
"It is."
Another pause. Crickets filled the space.
"Mom,"
Lauren began again.
"I think I owe you more than one apology."
Maggie looked at her daughter carefully. The lines under Lauren's eyes were deeper than Maggie remembered. The proud posture Lauren had always kept, chin high, arms crossed, was now softened. She looked like the girl who once sat beside her in the waiting room of the free clinic in Columbus, holding Maggie's hand after a scare.
"I wasn't kind to you after Dad died," Lauren admitted. "I think I blamed you for surviving."
The confession sliced clean, but Maggie didn't flinch. She simply nodded.
"You always acted like nothing touched you,"
Lauren continued, staring out into the yard.
"Like being poor, being abandoned, being looked down on. None of it mattered. I think I hated that, because I wasn't strong like that."
"I wasn't untouched," Maggie said quietly.
"I just learned not to let it show. Maybe that was a mistake."
"No," Lauren said quickly.
"It was just too strong for me to understand."
Silence again. Then Lauren reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper.
"Greg doesn't know I came. This is our mortgage statement. We're 4 months behind."
Maggie stared at the paper. The numbers didn't shock her. She'd lived among unpaid bills long enough to read their weight in ink. Lauren continued. "I'm not asking you to fix this. I know that's not fair. But I came because I needed to do something I haven't done in a long time." She turned to Maggie, eyes red.
"I needed to ask my mom for help. Not money, just help."
And suddenly, Maggie understood. This wasn't a negotiation for dollars. This was a plea for grace. Maggie stood and stepped down from the porch. The roses rustled behind her. She looked up at the stars, then turned back to her daughter.
"Come work in the garden with me tomorrow," she said. "Bring the kids. Let's grow something together."
Lauren blinked.
"That's your answer?"
"That's my offer."
Tears welled in Lauren's eyes, but she nodded. I'd like that. And just like that, the deal was made, not with signatures or spreadsheets, but with dirt under fingernails and forgiveness under breath. The screen door opened again and Clara stepped out holding a plate of cookies. You stayed. That's good, she said softly to Lauren. I'm trying, Lauren replied. That's enough, Clara said, placing the plate down. That's enough, Clara said, placing the plate down. The three women sat together on the porch, passing cookies and memories under a sky that had finally cleared. In the garden, the lemon tree swayed gently. A lock had been opened, and something old, something buried, had begun to grow. It began with thunder, low and distant, like the clearing of a great old throat. Maggie stood barefoot on the back porch, a basket of rosemary and tomatoes in one hand. Over the San Gabriel Mountains, clouds curled in like ash over embers, dragging the smell of coming rain. Inside the house, Clara was lighting candles. The wind had knocked the power out nearly half an hour ago, and the hum of Pasadena's usual quiet had been replaced with something more ancient. Wind, wood creaking, distant sirens, nature reclaiming the stage. Lauren and the kids had gone home that morning. The garden was still damp from their laughter, fingerprints in the soil, abandoned gloves by the fence. For the first time in many years, Maggie had found herself alone and not lonely. But then came the knock. Not the timid tap of a neighbor borrowing candles. Not the casual rap of a delivery left at the gate. It was frantic. Desperate. A staccato rhythm that pulled Maggie's breath short. She dropped the basket and ran. The front door groaned open against the wind, and there, soaked to the bone, clutching a bright red backpack, stood a girl, no older than 15. Wild hair matted against her forehead, lips trembling, eyes wide with a blend of defiance and fear. "Are you Mrs. Walker?" the girl asked, voice nearly lost in the wind. Maggie nodded. "I'm looking for Clara Monroe." Behind her, Clara appeared in the doorway, candle in hand. The girl's eyes snapped to her. "Aunt Clara?" she whispered. Time stopped. Clara's hand trembled slightly. The candle tilted. "Olivia?" she breathed. The girl nodded. Mom's gone. She said if anything happened, come find you. She made me memorize your address." And then the storm hit full. Rain poured like it had been held back for years. Thunder cracked over their heads. Maggie moved instantly. "Inside, sweetheart. Now." They wrapped her in towels. Clara lit the fireplace. Maggie stirred soup on the gas stove, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the quiet weight of witnessing something sacred unfold. Clara sat beside Olivia on the couch. The girl's eyes, a mirror of someone long gone, flicked between the fire and Clara's face. "You look like her," Clara whispered. "Mom said I would," Olivia replied. "She didn't talk about you much. Only said you were the only family she ever trusted, that you were brave, and that you left." A breath caught in Clara's throat. "I was young," Clara said. "Scared. I didn't know how to fight for her. And when I finally did, she was gone. She died in Fresno last week. It was fast. She'd been sick and hiding it." The room went still. Maggie brought over soup and set it gently on the coffee table. "You're safe now, Olivia," she said softly. "This storm will pass, inside and out." But the storm wasn't just outside. It was inside Clara, years of silence crashing like waves. It was in Olivia,
carrying a grief too large for her young shoulders. And in Maggie, it stirred the old ache of being left behind and the new tenderness of being needed. Later that night, when the winds had softened and the fire was a low whisper, Clara sat by the girl's side, brushing damp curls from her forehead. "You don't have to stay," Olivia mumbled, half asleep. "I do," Clara whispered. "I always should have." In the guest room, Maggie laid out clean pajamas and fluffed the old quilt Ellie once used for picnics. She paused at the doorway watching them, Clara and the girl, as the fire cast gold across their faces. The next morning, the garden shimmered under droplets like pearls. Olivia walked out barefoot, mug in hand, looking more child than wanderer. Maggie handed her a basket. "We harvest before noon around here," she smiled. "Even after a storm?" "Especially after a storm." And as they picked basil and thyme together, Clara leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed gently over her chest. "She came in the storm," she said. "No," Maggie replied, handing her a sprig of mint. "She is the storm, but maybe she's also the clearing." Pasadena wore the sunlight like a silk shawl that morning, warm, elegant, and hiding more than it revealed. The house on Orange Grove had settled into a quiet rhythm. Maggie brewed coffee while Olivia fed the cat Eleanor used to call Queen Margot. Clara stood on the porch, staring out at the garden where Ellie's old wind chime whispered secrets in the breeze. But this morning would not be like the others, because today the lawyer was coming. Maggie had tried not to think too much about the will since that day she opened the lockbox. Ellie's handwriting still haunted her. Firm, careful, unapologetic. "If this reaches you, it means I'm finally done. But you're beginning, Maggie. That's just starting." The doorbell rang at 10 a.m. sharp. Nancy Clayton, from next door, had come over early and was already seated at the dining table, dressed like she was going to church. Maggie had offered her coffee. Nancy had declined, too tense. And then he entered. Martin Bell, Esquire. A short man with a gentle gait and a leather briefcase that had likely known more secrets than most marriages. He removed his glasses, gave a tight smile, and nodded. "Ladies," he said, "this won't take long, but it may take something out of you." They all sat. Maggie, Clara, Olivia, and Nancy. Martin opened the envelope slowly, unfolded the will, and cleared his throat. "Last will and testament of Eleanor Hartman dated 2 years ago," he began. "I, Eleanor Hartman, being of sound mind and persistent stubbornness, do declare the following." A ripple of nervous laughter stirred the room. "To Margaret Walker, I leave the house at 742 Orange Grove Avenue, all contents, the deed, the titles, and the land on which it breathes. It is not a gift, it is a restoration." Nancy's eyes widened slightly. "To Clara Monroe, I leave the sum of $50,000, with instructions that it be used not for travel, not for rent, but for permanence. Whatever that means to her, I trust she will know." Clara's hand went to her mouth. "To Nancy Clayton, I leave the rosewood armoire in the back bedroom and the gold pocket watch hidden inside it. Yes, I knew you borrowed it. I also knew you never had the heart to keep it. Thank you for loving me in your quiet way." Nancy gasped. Her lip trembled. "That old rascal," she whispered. Martin turned the page. "To Olivia Monroe, should she ever come, I leave my journals, the heirloom ring from my grandmother Ruth, and my garden library card. If she's reading this, it means she found her way, and I believe she will do something better with the truth than any of us did."
Silence fell like velvet. Outside, a hummingbird darted past the window. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked one beat too loud. Maggie couldn't speak. She remembered the fight with Lauren in Ohio, the accusation, the humiliation. And now this house, this sanctuary, it had been hers all along. Ellie had planned for it, down to the roots of the roses out back. Clara looked down at her check and smiled with disbelief. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Maggie turned to her gently. "None of us earned Ellie's forgiveness. That's why it's a gift, not a reward." Nancy folded her hands in her lap, holding back tears. "She always said the real legacy isn't money, it's memory." "She didn't just give us a house," Maggie said. "She gave us a table, a porch, a way back." And then, as if summoned by memory itself, Lauren arrived. Uninvited, unannounced. She stood in the doorway, her eyes searching. Greg stood behind her, awkward and silent. And beside them, Emma and James. Olivia stiffened. Maggie rose slowly. Lauren's voice cracked. "I heard. Nancy told us about the will." Her eyes scanned the women sitting at the table. I didn't know she loved you that much." Maggie's voice was low and steady. "You didn't ask." Lauren flinched. Clara stood next. "This house isn't a prize, Lauren." "I know," Lauren said. "But Mom, I've been awful. I pushed you out. I blamed you for everything. I was scared that if you came back into my life, you'd remind me of how much I didn't do for you." "You mean when I was homeless and sleeping in my car?" Maggie asked quietly. Tears spilled down Lauren's cheeks. "I thought you'd come to take something from me. But now I see. You were the one who was taken from." A long pause. Then Emma stepped forward, holding a folded drawing. "Grandma, I made this for you. It's our new house. With Olivia." Maggie took the drawing gently. And in that single paper, crayons and all, was a house, a tree, a swing, a porch with 2 women, and 4 children with hearts above their heads. She turned back to the table. "I think," she said softly, "there's enough room here for one more chair." Lauren broke down, and Clara rose to wrap her arms around her. Greg stepped in, eyes full. "We'll help. We'll be better." Maggie met Nancy's gaze across the table. "The will named us," Nancy said. "But the table's open. That's how she wanted it." The day ended with laughter under the bougainvillea. Emma taught Olivia how to braid tiny daisies into her hair. James helped Clara in the kitchen. Greg hammered a new hook for the garden swing. And Maggie? She sat in Ellie's old rocking chair, reading one of the journals the woman had left behind. On the first page, Ellie had written in block letters, "The home I never had, I built for others to find." The late summer light had a gentleness to it, as if the sun, too, had grown tired of harshness. It filtered through the magnolia tree on Orange Grove Avenue, casting golden lace across the front porch where an old rocking chair creaked rhythmically. On Maggie Walker's lap lay a half-finished quilt, the last Ellie had ever started, the last Maggie would ever finish. Needle, pull, knot, breath. Each square was a story. One was stitched from Maggie's old waitress uniform in Columbus, Ohio, burnt orange with a coffee stain she'd once hated, but now kept like a scar that told its tale. Another was cut from Olivia's favorite sundress, the one she'd refused to throw away even when it got too short. One corner was Clara's,
soft navy blue corduroy from the coat she wore that first snowy night she knocked on the cabin door, and at the very center, a piece of Ellie's green garden apron, still faintly smelled of rosemary. The house was quiet, but not empty. Inside, Clara was teaching Olivia how to make buttermilk biscuits while Emma and James wrote thank you cards to neighbors who'd brought over housewarming gifts. Even Greg, newly between jobs and surprisingly relaxed, was out back repainting the old swing set with Lauren. Yes, Lauren. Still awkward, still healing, still trying. But present. Present mattered more than perfect. Maggie heard the screen door ease open behind her. "Can I help with the last square?" a voice asked softly. It was Olivia. Maggie looked up and smiled. "Only if you promise not to poke yourself," she teased. "I can't promise that," Olivia said, settling beside her. "But I promise to try." They worked in silence, sharing thread and sunlight, the kind of silence that said everything without needing sound. "You know what this quilt is?" Maggie asked after a while. "A memory blanket?" Olivia guessed. "Kind of," Maggie said, eyes warm. "It's a record of everyone who walked through pain and still showed up. It's what love looks like when it's been through the fire." Olivia thought about that, then asked, "Do you think Ellie knew it'd be us here now?" Maggie stared out into the garden, where Nancy was watering the roses. "I think she hoped for it," she said. "But more than that, she made space for it." She folded the quilt gently, her fingers lingering on that center green patch. "Love is just space," Maggie whispered. "Space to come back, space to grow." The breeze picked up. The wind chimes danced again. Inside the house, Clara's laugh echoed. For the first time in a long time, it didn't sound tired. And in the corner of the living room sat Ellie's journals, stacked neatly, their pages dog-eared and full of margin scribbles. Maggie had read most of them, but the last entry had stopped her in her tracks days ago. She hadn't shared it. Not yet. But maybe now. She reached into her apron pocket and unfolded the note. She handed it to Olivia without speaking. The girl read aloud. "If you are reading this, then the house is no longer empty. That means the table has chairs. The porch has stories. The garden has a name again. If you're here, whoever you are exactly who this house was waiting for." Olivia's eyes brimmed with quiet wonder. "I think she was writing to you," she whispered. "Maybe," Maggie said. "Or maybe to all of us." The sun slanted lower now. In a few hours, they'd gather at the dinner table, the new one Greg and Clara had built together, long enough for everyone. They'd eat lasagna and garlic bread and tell the story again of how James tried to fix the sprinkler and ended up flooding the roses. Olivia would show everyone her latest library card, her name officially on it now. And after dinner, when dishes were done, they would spread the finished quilt across the couch. Everyone would touch a piece that belonged to them. Some squares were jagged, some smooth, some stitched with tears. But all of them beautiful. And that night, as Maggie stood at the threshold of the house, she looked back once more at what they had built, not with money, but with mercy. The front porch lights clicked on. Someone had written on the mailbox in neat, careful letters, "The house that love rebuilt."